Hi everybody, what is going on, and welcome back to another RuneScape Classic video. In today's video, I will be discussing some basic things about RuneScape Classic that I think every new player should know before jumping into the game. My name's Posky, and welcome to the RuneScape Classic New Player Introduction. So one of the first things that people should know about RuneScape Classic is the mechanics of the game. One of the biggest differences between RS Classic and RuneScape 2 or Old School RuneScape is that they differ heavily when it comes to how the game works or the basic mechanics of the game. And one of the biggest differences between the games is the combat. So in RuneScape Classic, when you engage in combat, you are locked in for 3 rounds. So remember that when attempting to go to areas with high level monsters when you are either undergeared or underleveled. You have to wait 3 rounds before you can break combat and eat or use potions. This is always worth remembering that at least early on, if you are attempting quests with high level enemies like Dragon Slayer, Holy Grail, Waterfall Quest, where you have to fight high level enemies, be prepared to die if you are undergeared or underleveled. Another thing that's different about RuneScape Classic combat and later versions of the game is you can't range inside of melee. You will attack with melee with your bow equipped. So finding spots where you can range from safety is the way to go, but unlike range though, magic spells can be cast while in melee. So a thing to note is that you can actually range and cast magic through windows. So RuneScape Classic actually had a use for windows. They're essentially just holes in a wall that you can fire through. You can also range and mage across tables, through fences, and other things like that. You just cannot fire through solid walls. So I would also like to point out that according to the wiki, magic always goes towards the player's combat level, unlike in RuneScape 2 or Old School RuneScape, where your ranged and magic level both combine with your attack and strength level. Mage always contributes to the player's combat level. So people that train just melee combats and range are considered pures, same as if somebody made a mage only account, for PvP at least. Now another combat tactic that is in the later games, that is also in RuneScape Classic, is prayer flicking. But it is very difficult to do, but with practice I think you can get the timing down, although most people don't really bother with it, but if you would like to learn it, it is possible. There is also a guide on the RSC Preservation Discord for this exact thing. So another difference in RuneScape Classic is actually a very simple one, which is your gear. There is no gear inventory screen in RuneScape Classic, and instead is simply selected in your bag, which means it takes up slots in your bag, even while you're wearing the gear. Not a huge difference, as you get 30 bag slots in RuneScape Classic instead of the 28 in Old School RuneScape. Another difference in combat is that there is no speed when it comes to weapons in RuneScape Classic. So unless you're training on something that requires a specific shield like training on dragons, you should be using the strongest weapon that you can use. Since there is no weapon speed, only aim and power, this makes two-handers the strongest weapon in every tier besides the dragon weapons. Because of this, the rune two-handed sword is very, very good, and its price tag reflects that, at least on our server. Only being beaten out by the dragon sword and dragon battle axe, although only slightly on the dragon sword, which has 71 power and 71 aim, versus the rune two-hander's 70 aim and 70 power. Now it is also worth noting that you do have to complete Lost City to be able to use the dragon sword, and it is, I think, equally as expensive as the rune two-hander, but the rune two-hander has way less requirements to use it. Now the dragon battle axe does technically have worse aim at 69, but has way better power at 75, and I do believe it is the best weapon in the game. So I believe that covers most of the basic combat mechanics within the game that a new player would need to know before venturing out into the wonderful world of RuneScape Classic. But that doesn't cover all of the differences in combat. So there are a lot of differences when it comes to PvP combat in RuneScape Classic. I don't do PvP personally, so I don't have a lot of experience with PvP. So there used to be guides on the Discord, at least I swear there were. I don't know what's happened to them, but I went on YouTube and there's quite a lot of RuneScape Classic PvP guides or videos talking about PvP from people like Zooer and Fable Beast. And there's even a really old guide from about, I think it was like 11 years ago, that goes over the topic, and I think they can do a very good job explaining it to you guys. Now, the wilderness itself is not vastly different from RS2/RS3. It's actually interesting how very similar the wilderness is from Classic to RS2, as there's not many differences besides the extra content that was added during the lifespan of RuneScape 2. As a final note, there are only 4 pieces of dragon equipment in all of RuneScape Classic. The Dragon Sword and the Dragon Axe, aka the Dragon Battle Axe, were released at the same time in early 2002, while the Dragon Medium Helm were released later in 2002, with the Dragon Square Shield being released alongside the Legends quest. This means that there isn't really any benefit to going beyond 60 attack and 60 defense, since Dragon is the best equipment you can get in the game. The Dragon Square Shield also requires 60 smithing, and an extremely rare drop in the left half to make, but is the best shield in the game, beating out the Rune Kite Shield by +4. All of the items besides the Medium Helm are locked behind quests, but the Lost City quest and Heroes quest must be completed to complete Legends quest, so you get 2 of them knocked out pretty easily. So there's actually one unique mechanic about RuneScape Classic that I kind of glossed over, but didn't want to leave out because it is kind of important, but it is very basic, and that is actually the fatigue system. So if you look at your skills tab, down at the bottom you see this interesting one called fatigue. So the fatigue system, as far as I've been able to tell, was introduced into the game as a way to combat botting. The way it works is that whenever you train a skill, not only do you gain XP, but you'll also gain a certain percentage of fatigue. At 100% fatigue, you will no longer gain XP in skills. Now, one interesting use of this is that you could actually, if you were making it pure, you could get your fatigue to 100%, and then you could go farm certain enemies or do certain things without actually gaining XP in your combat stats. So the way to get rid of it is there's a sleeping bag that I pretty much always carry with me, or you can sleep in any number of the beds that are within RuneScape Classic. As far as my research has been able to tell me, the sleeping bag did not actually exist initially when they came out with the fatigue system, so it was even more difficult then. You had to sleep in your bed, but you click on the sleeping bag, you type in a little captcha, and then wait for your fatigue to drop all the way down to 0. You don't have to do it multiple times, as I kept doing when I first started playing. You just sit there, wait for your fatigue to hit 0, type in your captcha, and then you're on your way. So guys, that wraps up the combat mechanics and the fatigue mechanic, which I think are the most important core mechanics for new players to understand. There's only one other thing that I could think of off the top of my head, and that is the difference between the chainmail and the plate body. So if you're wearing a plate body in RuneScape Classic, you cannot wear gloves or gauntlets. So what a lot of pures will do is they will use the chainmail since they don't have to do Dragon Slayer, and they will get either steel gauntlets or Clank's gauntlets, and most of the time they'll go for Clank's gauntlets, and that's because you'd have to complete Family Crest to get the steel gauntlets, which would require you to train your magic, and as I said before, it is always counted towards your combat level, unlike range. So that's going to bring us to skilling. So skilling is where I feel like RuneScape Classic and future versions of RuneScape really are very similar except for a few skills. Those skills are fishing, woodcutting, and firemaking. The reason these skills are so vastly different is because of their chance to fail. So when you chop trees, attempt to catch a fish, or attempt to light a fire, there's a chance that you can fail to do so. This will result in you having to click the tree again, or the fishing spot, or in the case of firemaking, have to use the tinderbox on the log again. As far as I can tell, these are the only production skills that have this as a mechanic, since cooking and agility have built-in fail mechanics that are part of their core skilling, and are still present in the future versions of RuneScape. Mining, for some reason, does not have this mechanic, as your player will continue to hit the rock until it mines it. Sometimes you will fail to mine, but it's after multiple attempts of your character hitting the rock, and it was very rare that this happened to me in my grind to 50, and I think that the only reason that it would happen is either lag between the server or lag on my end. So this brings us to firemaking. Firemaking and prayer are the only 2 skills that really vastly changed from RuneScape Classic to RuneScape 2. In RuneScape Classic, you can only burn normal logs to make fires. This was only changed with the introduction of RuneScape 2 and the ability to burn logs higher than normal logs, but this also means that the way you gain experience from firemaking is different. Instead of gaining a certain amount of XP for that log type, your firemaking XP that you gain goes up as your level goes up. There is an equation on the RuneScape Classic fandom wiki to calculate how much XP you would get based on your firemaking level, but in total it takes 73,490 normal logs to go from 1 to 99 firemaking. So now that brings us to prayer. While it may seem very similar to the way prayer is implemented in later versions of the game, pretty much exactly the same, it is one of the only skills that got a massive upgrade when moving to RuneScape 2 and beyond. In Classic, there's only one way to train prayer, and that is by burying bones. There is no soul wars, pest control, or XP lamps to help boost prayer level, and there is no offering them to an altar for bonus XP. This is why bones are generally pretty expensive on our server, and that is because most people will just bury the bones right away as a way to train their prayer. Also, most areas where you can farm the better bones, big bones, and dragon bones, are decently far from banks, making it not really worth it to bank them for money. There are also only 3 types of bones, normal, big, and dragon, and the last prayer that you unlock is Protect from Missile at level 40. Paralyzed Monster, which is not something that made it into future versions of the game, which unlocks a level 37 prayer, is also an incredibly useful prayer, and one that I would definitely recommend grinding for. Now, with all that being said, prayer is an extremely useful skill. As everybody knows, it's extremely useful in every version of RuneScape since Classic. It is even more useful in Classic. So the reason to train your prayer past 40 is because that's going to give you a larger pool of prayer points. This means that you can use your prayers longer, and it also means that your prayer potions are going to restore more prayer points. And the reason that that's a useful thing is because prayer potions, while not super expensive, they are decently pricey. They're actually a lot cheaper than on old school RuneScape, which is kind of interesting because that's not really the case for any of the other items in the game. Well guys, that pretty much wraps up all of the skill-based new player stuff that I had in mind to talk about. I want to make another video where I go over training locations and quests that I would recommend new players do right away. I felt like it was worth it for us to do a video talking about skills and mechanics of the game because this game is, on the surface, RuneScape, but underneath with the mechanics, it is a lot different, and there's a lot of little nuances that are worth knowing in the game and things to think about when you are potentially planning out your training regiment or your path to whatever you're trying to get to. It does take a bit of planning, but I think what's great about the community now is that there are people building new skill calculators. There's a whole website, spinachroll.com, that has a bunch of great new RuneScape Classic skill calculators. There's also a new EXP high score. RC Preservation has their own, but there's a more detailed tracker that somebody has created as well. And I think for the last piece of advice that I would give out to new players, if you are playing RuneScape Classic, you 100% should be using RSC Plus. So RSC Plus was actually created back in 2016 during the final reopening of RuneScape Classic, and it is essentially the Rune Lite of RuneScape Classic. And I don't think that I would probably be playing the game today if it wasn't for that. So that's something that I would recommend 100%. I think it's going to be great for new players, especially with a lot of the odd things like the banking system and other stuff like that. I think that's going to be super helpful for players to be able to make that transition into playing it and be able to have an enjoyable experience. But with that being said, guys, like I say in every video, thank you guys for watching, and I appreciate all the views and support I've gotten on my videos, and I hope to see you guys out there in Gillinar. Have a good day.